Okay, I make it right on the dot at 7 o'clock, so I am going to begin. So Shavua Tov, welcome all of you who have come and joined us in for this session, Soul Traits for Navigating a Pandemic. This session is built on a number of programs that I have evolved really from almost the very beginning of the pandemic. Early on, as we were looking at what our community might need, one of the things that I instituted that I wasn't previously doing was I began to offer weekly meditation. And that meditation session has been based on all different kinds of materials over the course of the months. What I'm focusing on tonight is combining some of the practices that were woven into those sessions with the practice of Mussar study. I think many of you are probably familiar with or have had some introduction to Mussar study. Some of you may have come to an introduction to Mussar that I gave at Torathon either last year or the year before. But because I don't want to assume everybody is coming with any background information, let me just provide the briefest of introductions to what this body of study is without going into a lot of history, just really the essence. This is a practice that derives from traditions and communities of practice and texts of study that are centuries old, but which has had something of a revival over the last 20 or 30 years. And the essence of it is to look at ourselves one character trait at a time. And in paying attention to these individual traits, we can look at ourselves through the lens of these traits, to look at the ways in which our lives are in balance, the ways in which we respond to stimulus coming at us, to situations that arise. Do we respond in ways that are driven by thought and mindful awareness, or are we in a reactive mode? Something triggers us, something causes us to have an emotion arise, and then we respond out of that emotion before the mind has had a chance to sort of kick in and consider, how do I want to be present to this moment? And there's all kinds of mindfulness and meditation practices that essentially are training us as individuals, our souls, to do that kind of work. Mussar study happens to be a particularly Jewish flavor and is helpful because it divides up all of our experiences into these different traits. And each one, while in real life, there's often a combination of these traits that make the fullness of who we are, each one provides a lens for attention to detail. And as is often the case in Jewish practice, the goal when we study a particular trait is not to develop it to a specific endpoint. Every trait has ways in which we can have too much or too little of it. And so it's finding that balance point, and it's being aware especially of those moments of choosing where we could choose to exhibit more of a particular trait, or we might realize in this moment I need to hold back. And it's noticing where we are at that choosing point in any particular experience. That's what will be the point in which kind of mindful awareness kicks in, if we're acting and responding in a place of awareness. So what I wanted to do this evening was simply to take 2 or maybe 3, if we have time, of these character traits, ones that I think, through the experience we've had over these months, through these meditation programs, the ones that I think really serve us as tools that can help us get through what is still a good number of months ahead. We look back and we think how long this has been going, and we're getting impatient and we're getting exhausted. And there's so many challenges emotionally that we're dealing with in the midst of this pandemic. And some of these tools, I think, can be helpful when we're really feeling like we're going under, when we're really struggling to keep the sort of emotional explosions in check, to be driven with this mindful awareness through some of these practices. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to take us through a trait at a time, and there'll be certain moments where I'll ask questions, or at the end of one trait before I move on to the next, I'll invite some response and thinking, and I'll just kind of keep an eye on the time and keep us moving forward. So our first trait. Menuchat hanefesh. You'll see the translation here in the English is equanimity. But those two Hebrew words, menuchat, the t at the end is because it's connected to the second word, but menucha and nefesh, those words might be familiar to some. Does anybody like to offer what they believe to be the more literal meaning of those two words? Because that gets us to a slightly different feeling than the word equanimity, which is in English a tough word to really grapple with. Yes, Yael.
Okay, rest of the soul.
Right, exactly. Menucha, we talk about Shabbat menucha, right? And it's and what's interesting is it's not a kind of doing nothing kind of rest. If we had time, we could have a whole study session on what is the menucha that we're meant to have on Shabbat. It's a different kind of state of being than the busyness of work. Simplified perhaps, it's less of the doing and the active creation, and a little bit more of the being. But it's a state of being that still requires a certain kind of awareness. But it's a beautiful phrase in Hebrew, the idea of the rest of the soul. What has that got to do with equanimity? If we try to describe equanimity in other words, what would somebody say would be the essence of what does that word mean to you? To say that we're seeking equanimity. Anyone? I don't see everyone all on one screen, so feel free to unmute if I miss you.
Rabbi, yes, I think that might be middle ground.
Middle ground. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, right? Trying to kind of, the middle point on the seesaw. Gordon.
Yeah, I think of it as kind of accepting what is without fighting against it.
Okay. So let's come to, and I think all of this, these are, there are many aspects and qualities to this. I think both of those capture some aspect of what it means to talk about equanimity. One way that we sometimes hear it translated, we talk about the rest of the soul. Sometimes you'll hear it to be in a state of calmness, the calmness of the mind. Alan Marinis, who's one of the writers who's really done a lot of work to bring Mussar into a contemporary setting, writes a lot about this particular trait among others. And what he does is he points out another name and a word that comes out of a story that gives you a sense of what this energy might feel like. So we think of menucha, we think of Shabbat menucha, but before that, well before that, if we go to the story of Noah's Ark, the name Noah in Hebrew, Noach, is connected to this. And we find actually a phrase that when the flood has filled the earth, that once the rain has stopped, a dove is sent out. A bird is sent out. And in Genesis 8:9, it says that the dove found no rest. And the Hebrew there is manoach. So it's the same root. And so the bird, initially finding nowhere to rest, no place to land, returns to the ark. And if we think about what this quality is, this state of being able to rest, this state of being able to find a place for the mind that has reestablished its balance, is not necessarily about wanting to be in a completely still place. I think that's one of the things that sometimes when we're in the midst of turmoil, or when we're feeling upended, we just want it all to go away, right? We want it to be gone. I just want to be left alone and to be completely still and just be able to breathe. But this particular trait, this idea of equanimity, is not about just sleeping through it all. If we think of another biblical story, in the story of Jonah, when Jonah goes down in the boat as he's trying to escape from God's will, and falls asleep in the bottom of the boat while there is a storm raging around him, we're not meant to get from the story that in that moment that's a good thing. We look at that moment and we go, how could he possibly be fast asleep in the midst of such a raging storm when the rest of the sailors are doing everything they can just to keep the boat afloat? We don't want to be so calm that we're in that place. And in fact, the word for Jonah sleeping in that particular piece of the story, it only comes up a couple of places in the Torah, and the context in each time is one in which we're meant to glean from the context that this is a dangerous situation where someone is in such a state of denial and such a deep sleeping place that they're actually close to death. And that's not, we're not looking to kind of tune out and zone out. And so it's a little bit like imagining if we're standing on a ladder and we've got something we have to do, right? I don't know about you, I'm scared of heights. And so I get on ladders when I have to get on a ladder to reach something or do something, but I'm in a state of internal anxiety when I'm on that ladder. In that particular moment, I know that it's not the right thing to go, oh, I wish I was in a state of menuchat hanefesh where I was totally like in this sleep, like kind of chilled out mode. No, I don't really want to be in that mode while I'm on the ladder because I know I have terrible balance. And so what I want is to be alert, to be awake to where I am and what I need to do and what's going on. But ideally, I'd like to do it in a way in which my internal anxiety is not all churned up. And so that's really, I think, a better way of articulating what it is to be seeking a place of equanimity. So I imagine we've all had moments over these last few months where we have been in a state of emotions are churned up, anxieties are churned up. And how do we manage that for ourselves? What's interesting in the practices that we've been using when we look at this particular trait is that they're practices that are core really to just about every different modality of meditation practice. Because what it begins with is having that piece of yourself that is watching, that kind of, instead of being sucked in through the emotion and getting swept away in it, is able to detach a little bit enough to be the watcher. And so that you're in a place where you can start to observe what the mind is doing and what the emotion is doing. And from that place, start to notice that, oh, okay, how can I restore a little bit more of inner calm so that I can look at what's going on, and with that little bit of distance, instead of being swept up by it, I can maybe choose how to respond. So I would like to offer you an opportunity.
Is another way of saying it, can you say okayness? Like the state, I'm okay. Or not relaxed, not out of it, but it's okay, or I'm okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely essentially that's what we're trying to seek, right? To get to that place where we're not being led by the state of panic, and that's one way to go. I want to offer us a slightly different metaphor. Some of us have meditation experience, some don't. Some find some forms of meditation easier than others. I'd like to offer you just briefly here an experience that might be a tool that you can draw on when you notice you are especially churned up. If you have a moment to kind of pull back from what's going on and try and find that place of balance, again, that place of I'm okay. And it's a visualization that really thinks about when we are being knocked off balance, when we're feeling churned up. So if you're comfortable doing so, I'd invite you to just notice where you are, find a place that's comfortable to sit, and to close your eyes. And we're going to just do mini versions of these meditations because we don't have a whole lot of time. So what I'm trying to do is just provide you with a taste and some of the tools. And if you're just settling in and you close your eyes, I want you to try and visualize a lake. Perhaps a lake that you know. We certainly have plenty to choose from in central Massachusetts. And you are sitting in the midst of this lake, a little ways off from the shore, in a canoe. And it's a beautiful day. And the sun is on your face. And you're not in the middle of rowing anywhere. You are just simply being gently moved just a little bit this way and that way by the gentle bobbing of the water. And as you sit there, a sound starts to disturb the tranquility that you were feeling. It's a kind of ugly, angry, noisy sound that's getting closer. And you see that coming toward you from not so far away is a motorboat. And you start to anticipate what's going to happen if that motorboat continues to come close enough, doesn't stay far away enough from where you are. And you start to feel that the waves are no longer gently bobbing, but are starting to churn up a little bit more. And as that motorboat goes speeding by several feet away from you, you watch as the water that is churned up starts to come closer towards you. And you breathe deeply, just letting those waves come. They're going to rock the boat more than you're comfortable with, but they're going to pass through where you are, and they're going to keep going. And watch them as they head towards the shore. And the water pulls back and the next one comes in. And you continue to watch as those waves start to tamper down and the water starts to be restored to a place of calm. You watch the last waves break along the shore. And you take in again the calmness of the water, the absence of the waves, the absence of the motorboat. And this is the moment that you can remember. The boats will come and the waves will come. But if you simply allow them to pass through, sometimes there's nothing that you can or need to do, but simply wait for the calm water to return. Because the boats and the waves and the rocking, they are all a part of life. And once the boat leaves, you'll have that assurance that even though your boat will rock, it won't be turned over. And you can find this place of inner calm for yourself whenever it feels like the outside waves are just a little too harsh. This is a meditation that can help reduce our blood pressure and really calm our breathing and help us come back to that place of equanimity. So before I move us on to a different trait to look at, I want to offer another modality beyond a visualization that I have found helpful, which is that of chant meditation. And one doesn't have to be a singer to do chant meditation. Sometimes it's just about finding a phrase in Psalms or in a piece of liturgy or a piece of text and repeating it and taking in the meaning of the words, letting that kind of, again, give us that place of calm and carry us. So I'm going to put some words up on the screen in just a moment. And these are words from Isaiah. One of the foremost writers and teachers of Jewish chant practice is Rabbi Shefa Gold. So this is one of hers. And I offer, while we're going to stay on mute, as you pick up the melody, sing it with me, and we'll sing it a few times through. Ki ta'avor b'mayim itchani, itchani. Ki ta'avor b'mayim itchani, itchani. Uvanharot lo yishtafucha, lo yishtafucha. Uvanaharot lo yishtafucha, lo yishtafucha. When you pass through the waters, I am with you. Yes, I am with you. When you pass through the waters, I am with you. Yes, I am with you. I won't let the rivers overwhelm you. I will be with you. I won't let the rivers overwhelm you. I will be with you. When you pass through the waters, I am with you. Yes, I am with you. When you pass through the waters, I am with you. Yes, I am with you. I won't let the rivers overwhelm you. I will be with you. I won't let the rivers overwhelm you. I will be with you. Ki ta'avor b'mayim itchani, itchani. Ki ta'avor b'mayim itchani, itchani. Uvanaharot lo yishtafucha, lo yishtafucha. Uvanaharot lo yishtafucha, lo yishtafucha. So we take a breath, find our place of balance. I'm going to move on to one more trait, one that I think we're going to need, particularly over these winter months. Some of us have been needing to draw on this particular trait quite a lot since November 3rd. Savlanut, patience. I offer this quote as a way to begin from Rabbi Michael Schiffman. It's not as important to do as much as I can with the least amount of waiting as it is to have treated people well along the way. It's not as important to do as much as I can with the least amount of waiting as it is to have treated people well along the way. So in Musa, when we are looking at different modalities, there's meditation, there's chanting, there's journaling, and there's a little bit of text study. And so I want to just, again, just pause for a couple of minutes and give any who want to respond to that quote as a sort of stimulus when it comes to savlanut, to patience. How does that quote from Rabbi Schiffman speak to you? Perhaps there's a particular example that comes to mind of where you've been challenged or where you've had an experience of someone treating you in a particular way that either did or did not demonstrate a kind of patience, savlanut. Anybody have a response that they'd like to offer? I know we haven't all been patient for 8 months. I know we've been challenged. Suzanne?
Yeah, I would just like to share a story. When we first moved here, all 5 of us had to go to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, I think it's called here in Massachusetts, to get our license. It changed over and the license plates, it was a mess. And we go in, there were always people waiting and they were very impatient. I just remember when it was our turn, that the woman who was helping us was extremely friendly. I could not believe it. And we were just really patient with her. And it helped a lot to have a sense of humor. I have to remember that. Yeah, I think I said something like a long wait, or I don't remember exactly, but I remember thinking how many people were there sitting for a long time and they were not very happy. And then and I remember I'm from the South, and so you're friendly, it's what you do. And it worked out much better. She was great with us.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is one of these cases where I know for myself, there are certainly moments when I am caught and I realize that I have become impatient. Usually in situations like Suzanne was describing, the situation, it is what it is. I don't have control. And part of, again, the churning up of emotions is because we don't have control. And the moment is not unfolding in the way that we would have wanted it to. And I'm reminded always of a beautiful quote that I heard at a meditation retreat offered by Sylvia Borstein, who said that when people ask her, how you doing? And she might have, she's not a young woman anymore. She might have some aches and pains. And she said, I don't like the answer, I could be better. She said, if I could be better, I would be better. But in this particular moment, I am where I am, right? I might be upset about something. My joints might be hurting. I might be sad about something. And that ability to simply be present to what is happening in this moment and to say, this is what it is right now. and to then choose how to deal with the situation. I want to share with you a short quote that really moved me. It was actually shared by a colleague of mine, Rabbi Stephanie Colin, in one of her High Holy Day sermons. And I then, in her name, borrowed it and used it in one of mine. She gave it on Rosh Hashanah, so I had a chance to read it and go, oh, that's going to work really well in one of my Yom Kippur sermons. And she was talking about something that some of you may have heard of, the Stockdale paradox. And the Stockdale paradox is named for Admiral James Stockdale. And he was held as a hostage in Vietnam for 7.5 years. And when he was asked about this ability to survive, to keep going, and to maintain a kind of inner strength through what was often a very brutal reality, he said, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality." And he spoke of a kind of faith that is also epitomized in other teachings we find in Judaism. Gamzer Bavor, this too is eventually going to pass. The experience that I'm in right now, it's not going to be the forever experience. It wasn't here before. It won't be here forever. It is here right now. And when we're caught up in a reaction to that, this is not how I want it to be. This is not what I want to be doing right now. Why can't this go? When will this change? When will life get back to normal? If we allow ourselves to get caught in that intensity of emotion, the Buddhists would say we're getting attached to the suffering. We're in this moment. It is what it is. And I can choose, if I have some self-awareness of this moment that I'm in, I can choose to respond differently. I was really struck by, again, Alan Marina's teaching about the Hebrew root of this word that we translate as patience, savlanut, samach lamed nun. There's a whole bunch of words that use the same 3-consonant root that mean different things that I think really pick up the flavor of what it is to have patience. Sevel means suffering. Lisbol is to suffer. Sevolet is tolerance. A sovel is a burden or a load. And a sabol is a porter or a carrier. And so he suggests that being patient does not mean that you are in a completely calm and unruffled state of mind, but rather you're able to bear the burden of your hostile and explosive feelings without reacting. So you feel the weight of the moment. You don't say, this is nothing really. How could we possibly say that? 250,000 people dead. We can't, that's not the goal. The goal is not to say, it's not really that bad. It is that bad. And we're in the beginnings of what's likely to be another terrible surge. There's nothing that's good about that. And yet, when I feel the emotion of that, the question is, so what will I do in this moment? And when I think about savlanut being about bearing a burden, I think one of the ways we most help to carry burdens is to share the burdens with each other. That when I know I've checked in with members of my community, the ones who are suffering the most are the ones who have withdrawn, the ones who are carrying it completely on their own shoulders and are not reaching out to anyone. And I often feel so helpless to do something when somebody's got some real tachlis that they're dealing with. And I'm always reminded that sometimes simply picking up the phone and them having had a chance to tell me what's going on, the response that I get is, you know, I really appreciate just being able to talk to you. You know, that you don't need to do more right now. That was enough. That's something that I didn't realize how much I needed. And I think that's something that we all can do for each other, to be aware when we need to share our burden a little bit with somebody else. And that one of the ways that we deal with the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment is to look for the opportunities when we feel that we have the capacity, when we feel like we're breathing a little deeper, when we're not feeling quite so overwhelmed ourselves, to reach out and lift up someone else. That spirit of generosity is not only a mitzvah and giving to somebody else, but it's also an enormous gift to ourselves, because there is a feel good that comes from that connection with another one, that actually helps to carry ourselves through this moment. So there's some truth to that. So I want to pause again for a moment, because I'd asked before about that quote from Rabbi Schiffman. It's not how much I get done in the least amount of time, but it's how I treat people along the way. Are there other examples or stories that come to mind that someone might want to offer as a reflection as to how they might have received or had an opportunity to change gears when they were in one particular moment and could have exploded, but in fact caught themselves and was able to redirect? Yeah, Elle, please.
So it's interesting. I was thinking about two ends of my life. When I was a parent of a infant and a toddler and a young person, and trying to slow myself down to his pace, my son's pace, and often finding that I just wanted him to move faster or do more, like going for a walk with him. Why does he have to walk so slowly? And then at the end of my mother's life, when she was quite disabled and not able to move very fast, and I would have to totally slow my pace down to match hers, and how hard it was on both ends, and the thought process that I had to go through, like, slow down, there's no reason to rush, you'll get there, like, and it was hard, but it was also, I was noticing that I was meeting them where they were.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think wonderful examples of savlanut.
Rabbi, can I be heard?
Yes.
I worked at the polls, the voting polls. I was a poll worker. And I was at one table and something happened, not at my table, thank goodness. I'm not sure if I would have been patient and tolerant if it happened. But I was observing and hearing it happen. And I was very disturbed. If it happened at my table, I might have told the warden I would have to leave. But as I saw and heard it evolve, it wasn't my table, so I had no control. We had police officers there. They did not do what I expected them to do. I don't want to get into what the issue was, but I had voters coming up in front of me. So here I have this disturbance, this rage going on, whatever. And so I continued to smile and treat everyone with love and tolerance. I had no idea how they were voting, but I still had to deal with that rage that I had. So at the first opportunity, I asked the other person, could you cover for me? And I needed to tell the warden and the clerk how I felt. Now, I don't think I got validated. I don't think they did anything with it, but that idea of saying it. Now, the irony, I sat down for a lunch break and my warden, there was another issue. My warden sat down right next to me and said, that other thing that you were disturbed about, don't pay attention what that other warden said to you. I'm your warden, and I think what you did was okay. So I used opportunities to keep sharing and telling others, but not with any expectation that they were going to fix it. And, you know, I worked 15 hours that day, and I had a smile and a gratitude for everybody, but there were a couple of very disturbing things. So I think that patience and talk to somebody about it. But the key was, don't expect anybody else to fix my feelings or fix the situation. So that's what that made me think of.
Right, right. Thank you. And I think that perhaps some of us may have experienced this, or as Susan did, have witnessed something where, these are practices in which we might feel an explosive moment coming on. We feel the emotions rise within us. And if we're using, if we do this on a daily basis, if we take the time to meditate, to chant, to reflect, to look at a quote and just to sit with it for a while, then, it puts ourselves in a better position to choose the response in the next moment that arises. But we have to remember that we are moving through space and in places with all kinds of people, and not everyone has that kind of inner voice, sort of the watcher, watching out for them. And so when somebody does explode or seems to be behaving in a way that's inappropriate or unreasonable or unfair to someone who's just there trying to do their job, we've all heard too many stories like that. Sometimes the best way to de-escalate those situations, or if we have nothing to do with it, if we're just watching, as opposed to feeling the rage come up within us, is to try and express, at least inwardly, some compassion, because what might be coming out in an explosive way may have nothing whatsoever to do with the place and the space and the interaction we're witnessing. It could be that enormous burden, that sabot that is being carried by an individual, and that's invisible to us, and we don't know how large it is, and we don't know how long they've been carrying it, and that sometimes helps us navigate our own feelings when we are witness to something that isn't exactly something that we're ourselves directly involved in. We have about 8 minutes. I'd like to just briefly touch on one more. Clearly, we won't have a lot of time, and that is bitachon. Bitachon is another of those wonderful Hebrew words where it gets used in a lot of different contexts, and a lot of authors writing about the trait of bitachon in Musa will often say it's perhaps one of the more difficult midot to acquire. It's a kind of trust, a kind of faith. The root bet tet chet, to be at ease, to trust, to be confident. It's interesting in modern Hebrew, the Misrad HaBitachon is the defense ministry. So it's very interesting to see it used in that context. Same root, Bituach Leumi, is the national insurance system. So we see the sort of different flavors. What does it mean to be able to trust, to be confident in, have confidence in something? In both of those contexts, whether it's the defense ministry and national insurance system, I think about sort of the kind of the different vessels that we create in our communities and our societies to provide that sense of safety, right? It's like I'm putting my hands up like this because it literally is as kind of like, what's going to carry us through? What's going to help us survive this moment? I mentioned before the example of the Stockdale paradox, and the Admiral Stockdale, when he was asked about that survival of that 7.5 years, he talked about the people who he felt struggled the most, and sometimes even if they made it out physically, didn't do so well at making it out mentally, is that he said they kind of created arbitrary targets. They were optimists. They would say, you know, I'll be out by Easter, I'll be out by Christmas. And those times would come and they would go and they'd still be there. And I think we've heard, many of us have studied Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He talks about a very similar phenomenon in terms of people in the camps. And you know, it's not about the reality of who survives and who doesn't, but it's about how we continue on in a situation which in its moment might seem hopeless. And what Admiral Stockdale said was that I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never lost faith in the end of the story. And so I think the kind of faith that he's expressing there is the essence of bitachon. Our time is short, we won't be able to do more meditation on this. But I think that faith and trust is something that for many of us is one of those tough ones. What does that look like? The mantra that has really spoken to me, that I've come back to over and over again during this time, are the last two lines of Adon Olam. In your hands I place my soul, when I sleep and when I wake, and with my soul, my body too, the eternal presence is with me, I shall not fear. I first find myself chanting this as a mantra many, many years ago. I was driving back from doing a research project. This was before I was in rabbinic school. I was an academic in a different career, and I was driving through torrential rain in the middle of the English countryside on a single lane road, and I had no idea where I was going, and there was no place to pull in. This was before there were GPSs. And I was just praying that I'd stay on the road and that nothing would come barreling towards me. And I found myself starting to chant this. And at the time it was just a melody, and I couldn't even remember what the words were and why this melody had popped into my head. It got me all the way home in terms of being able to try and sustain a degree of calm. And so I feel it's that kind of trust. It's not, you know, it's not some specific theological belief, but it's this sense that I'm going to rest into the moment and allow myself to be carried. Beyado hafkid ruchi be'etishan ve'ayira ve'him ruchi gaviati Adonai li v'lo ira Beyado afkid ruchi V'etishan ve'ayira V'him ruchi gaviati Adonai li v'lo ira. So I want to thank you all for joining me this evening. As I mentioned, I do a weekly meditation. It's at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. You can find it on Our Synagogue's Facebook page. It gets broadcast there. It also gets broadcast on our temple website, on our live stream. And if you want to be able to join the Zoom room with others who come in to sort of check in before and after the meditation itself, feel free to drop me an email at rabbi@sibaneshalom.org, and I'd be happy to send you the Zoom link if you'd like to join us there. Thank you all. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, and I'll see some of your faces as I choose the next thing that I'm going on to study. And Leah, I'll transition out of here. I know it will happen automatically in about 60 seconds, but I think people can also click at the bottom right where it says leave room, and you'll find yourself back in the main room where you can have a chance to connect with everybody else before going on to your next session.